Finish your meal.
Hey, it's Mike with ADS. Welcome back to our second video on our series talking about suppressors. Tonight, we are going to discuss how to actually select a suppressor that you would actually need and want to use. And really, the technology is going to boil down to a couple of major choices and then a lot of little tiny choices. The first two big things really to talk about are the differences between the tech. We have traditional baffle suppressors, and then we have newer flow-through systems. Now, what are the difference between those? Well, traditional baffle is what the original technology was actually based on. And with a traditional baffle system, we have a series of chambers that redirects gases, as we discussed last time, through the suppressor back into the actual rifle or handgun, back into essentially the feeding system, and then reduces overall decibels. And this traditional system, there's advantages and disadvantages. And really there's disadvantages and advantages to both of these. The other system, flow-through, is a little bit different. Now this is a flow-through system from B&T, and what the design features in this are, and I'll kind of show a little video that shows how a flow-through system works, is that instead of using traditional baffles on the inside, it's using a series of redirected smaller channels and chambers to cycle gas through the suppressor to help cool those gases as it dwells and lingers a little more, and then redirects the gases actually out of the front of the suppressor. So those are the two big choices at first. Are we going to run something that is baffled, traditional technology, or we're going to run something that is flow-through? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of a baffle-based system? Well, the traditional baffle-based system is going to be very good for, say, a bolt-action rifle where we're only cycling one round at a time, and a lot of the gases really aren't going to be too much of a problem in our face. In addition to, baffled systems are really good for reducing the overall decibels that are going to be heard. In fact, you can even argue that flow-through systems are going to be a little bit louder, particularly at the muzzle, versus a baffle-based system. Some of the other advantages, it's a well-established technology, so the price is going to be just a little bit less typically than some of the newer flow-through systems. Now, even though the baffle systems will be really good for, say, something on a bolt action, they are still really good on other systems as well, such as an AR-15 that's doing direct impingement. But where it becomes a disadvantage is that with a direct impingement system, we do start to have gas issues as gas is then redirected back into the rifle. And that can cause overgassing or sometimes even undergassing, where we actually have to tune a little more on the rifle, which we're going to discuss in a later video. Again, tonight we're just focusing on how to choose. Later we're going to discuss on how to mitigate that overgassing of an AR platform. Now, with the flow-through system, these are going to be really good for longer strings of fire, certainly, especially if I'm doing something full auto, if I'm in the military or law enforcement. That's going to be really good for those types of systems. It's also really good for health of the shooter, too, as gas is instead being fed, it's not being fed directly back in the system, being pushed out the front. As a shooter, I'm getting way less gases in my face. And, overall, those gases from firing a firearm, they are toxic to you. They're not good for your health. So if you do a lot of shooting, you're on the range a lot, something like a flow-through is going to be a better choice. Now, they tend to also help your platform run a lot cleaner too, because again, we don't have all those gases and fouling going back into the actual receiver of the firearm. Whereas a baffled system, we are going to get more gases back into the system, so it is going to foul things more, and we are going to have to clean our rifles just a little bit more and just be aware of that. That you are going to have issues, say, with carbon locking on parts and a lot of carbon fouling buildup, say, on bolts, and redirected gases again into your face with a baffled system versus a flow-through. Now, some of the cons with a flow-through system is that if you're running NVGs, you tend to get more flash out the front of this, and so that could be an issue, creating photonic issues again if you're running nods. Another thing is that they tend to heat up a lot faster, but also they will tend to cool down faster as well. Baffled system, they tend to heat up a lot slower, and again, just vice versa, they will tend to shed that heat off a lot slower as well.
Suppressor burn. I touched it for just a second. All right here. It's all right here. Because I I went to grab here.
You're a man.
I'm a man.
You see grip the can.
I went to grab. I literally heard a tss of my own skin.
Honestly, between the two, if you're worried about heat, it becomes 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Really, it's your choice. Where do you want to cut that? Do you want it to, heat up a lot slower but cool down slower versus heating up faster and cooling down faster? It's kind of just, shooter's choice at that point. Now, another disadvantage to the flow-through system is that even though you're not getting as much gas back into your actual firearm on that platform, where we then don't have to clean and worry about fouling as much there, these will run a little bit dirtier, which means maintenance will be more of an issue with the flow-throughs versus the baffle systems. One of the suppressors that we at ADS run, we run these from, this is the TAC-33L titanium one that we run from Canco. Canco, one of the things that they pride themselves on, and when we talk to Neil, the CEO of the company, talks about you're not needing to clean these things for at least 10,000 rounds. It's kind of a point of pride for him. At least that's what he's putting out to me, and we really love these. They're pretty dang quiet, really, really good company, so shout out to Canco. With the flow-throughs, though, you're going to have to use solvents and clean these a lot more often, but it is an easier cleaning, though, versus a baffle, where once I soak this, I can literally just throw this back on the firearm, and I can just start shooting rounds and basically shoot any of the leftover chemical and residue and fouling right out the front, which is kind of a neat feature. And how do you know you need maintenance on one of these things anyways? Honestly, one thing you can do is you can weigh it, know the weight of your suppressor beforehand, and if you start to then weigh it again later, you start to get about an ounce or more heavy than where it was when you weighed it the first time. It's probably looking about time to clean one of these things. Now let's kind of look at some of the materials that are used in them. A lot of suppressors will use things like stainless steel, even aluminum, and then you'll actually get some companies that are using something called Inconel, which is a nickel chromium based material. Very durable, very heat resistant, and so they tend to heat up a lot slower, but then of course sheds heat a lot slower as well. And you also have titanium based systems, so something like this is a Griffin Armament bushwhacker right here. It has a little bit more weight, and that's going to be some of the differences too. When you start getting Inconel and stainless steel, you start to get more weight on the end of your rifle, and so if weight is of concern for you when you're running a platform, then maybe stainless steel and those aren't going to be the best choice for you, but they do work, and they work really well because it's a tried and true tested material and they function. Now, here we have the TAC-33 from Canco. This one is titanium. With the titanium based systems, they tend to be, you're shedding quite a few ounces. They're a lot lighter weight on the end of your rifle. But some of the disadvantages with titanium is, well, titanium will heat up a lot faster and then cool a lot faster as well. But that heat builds up pretty dang quick. And another thing that happens with titanium is that you actually have a much more drastic break-in period with titanium suppressors, because during the milling process when they make these things, or even if they're 3D printing them, which a lot of companies are now, you have companies like Huxwrx and B&T that are actually doing 3D printed titanium. There ends up being titanium dust that's actually in the channel down the center of that suppressor. And as you're firing your first few shots, and it's very, very cool if you do it at night under night vision, as you'll get actual sparks, almost like some dragon's breath, right out the front end of that. And eventually that will calm down a whole bunch, but with titanium, you're always going to have a little bit more spark with something that's going to be Inconel or something that's going to be stainless steel. Now, B&T is doing some very cool stuff. Then we saw them at SHOT Show earlier this year. And what B&T has been doing, they've been doing hybridized systems. They have been taking 3D printed titanium, but instead of it being a titanium blast baffle or a blast channel in at the start of it, they're using an Inconel one that's basically embedded in that 3D printing. So they're creating it as trying to get the best of both worlds, where we're getting the slower heating out blast baffle there, but then the rest is that lightweight titanium. We've looked at baffle-based systems, we've looked at flow-through, and we've looked at the different materials from Inconel to stainless steel to titanium. Now let's look at actually the calibers. We can actually fit these to be very caliber specific, where you have a suppressor built solely around that caliber. Now, this is a Thunder Chicken from, no, not Thunder Chicken, I'm sorry, this is a Thunder Chicken from Q, and this one is a 7.62 based one. Now, in all reality, you could actually use this and fire 5.56 and smaller rounds through this, and a lot of people will actually do that, where they consider them multi-cal. In fact, the ones that we're running specifically from Canco, These are multi-cal as well. Now, we have a front end plate on the front end of this that is set for 5.56. And when we take that off, it actually will function and has ports to function more as a flow-through also. It's kind of a unique design feature that Canco's done with this. But it also allows us to fire 30 cal through this as well, as the actual diameter of the channel is measured to 0.33. Now, something like the Bushwhacker, I believe this is set for 45, 46 cal. Again, we can run larger calibers through this. And then we have something like the Lazarus from Dead Air. This one is a 6.6 cal, so you can, or 6.6 millimeter. So you can kind of see that if we're hitting at those calibers and below, you can actually run different calibers through these. So you actually have quite a bit of options there. You will get better sound and decibel reduction if you run a suppressor that is specific to the caliber that you're shooting. And of course, you never ever want to go lower than that, just like you would never want to throw the wrong caliber rounds for the wrong caliber gun, because you don't want to end up with something like a baffle strike or blowing off the front end cap off of your suppressor. So for example, mission-driven tools, what would I need for, say, something like, this is a home defense setup that we featured on the channel before, one of our Mark 18s. Now, we have one of the Canco TAC 33s. This is the regular steel and Inconel one versus the titanium one. Jaden runs that titanium. And when we do this, we keep the 5.56 end cap on the front end of this, and we want those decibels reduced as much as we can, because, again, this is based around a home defense setup. And with something like a Mark 18, it is going to be drastically overgassed. And so then I would also have to deal with any of the overgassing issues. And we'll talk about how to do that in one of our next videos. But if I'm doing something more that's like hunting, I'm going to want something that's maybe a lot higher caliber. Maybe I am going to go something that's more 7.62 and maybe more baffle based. So something like the Thunder Chicken might be really fantastic for that. Now, you also have other things to consider too. Mounting options are a big thing with suppressors also, when we start talking hubs and muzzle devices, but that's going to get really into the weeds, and we are going to cover that in one of our next videos also. But for tonight, we're just looking at the different styles of how these things are produced and what you might need. So really, in the end, what does it boil down to? How do we select the suppressor we need? What is our application? Home defense? Is it hunting? Is it hobby shooting? Are we just doing plinking on a range with the 22, and then maybe just a little 22 rimfire suppressor will be more than enough? If I am using something, doing long strings of fire, and maybe I'm law enforcement or military, maybe something with a flow-through is going to be a lot better as well. Am I concerned about heat? If I'm concerned about heat, titanium might not be the best option in that case. I want to lean more towards Inconel and stainless steel. However, if weight becomes an issue, and I'm going to have that rifle out there for an extended period of time doing those strings of fire, then maybe I do want to start leaning more towards hybrids materials like the titanium Inconel hybrid systems from B&T, or a titanium milled one from, say, Canco, or something from Huxwrx with their flow-throughs. So you can see there's a lot of different options out there. And hopefully this video kind of dispelled some of the mystery behind suppressors to help you dive into this. And I'll say this, we at ADS are definitely not the end-all speakers on suppressors. We are not the absolute experts. We've just dived into this a whole lot in the last year and a half and done our own learning, and honestly, a lot of it smacking our own heads against the wall, learning and figuring out how to properly suppress our platforms and how to reduce overgassing in our system. So a lot of just learning by mistake from us. So it's been a real adventure, and we just wanted to share some of what we learned with you tonight. And like I said, there's a lot of other great guys out there that you can definitely talk to in the industry that will definitely steer you in the right direction as well. So this is Mike, Jaden, and James with ADS. Thanks for sticking around tonight. Remember, stay prepared, not scared. God bless and good night. Be a man. See grip that can.